My name is Sam Harlan, and I am 45 years old. 2 months ago, on a Tuesday morning, more than 300 people lined up down Main Street in the cold to have breakfast at my little diner. A diner that a wealthy developer named Trent Vaughan had spent the better part of a year trying to destroy so he could buy the corner it sits on for pennies. The line went past the hardware store and around the block. The local paper sent a photographer, and Trent Vaughan, who had been so sure he could starve my family out, drove down Main Street that morning in his big black SUV and had to stop at the light right in front of my diner, and he sat there and watched 300 of his neighbors line up to save the very place he had tried to kill. And he understood in that moment that he had lost, and worse, that everyone now knew exactly what he had done. For almost a year, Trent Vaughan ran a quiet, vicious campaign to sabotage Harlan's diner, the business my grandfather opened in 1954, and my father ran after him, and I have run for the last 12 years. He filed false health complaints. He planted fake reviews. He spread rumors about rats and food poisoning. He tried to strangle my family's livelihood slowly and anonymously so that I would have no choice but to sell him the corner he wanted for his development, at whatever price he cared to offer a desperate man. He was patient and he was careful, and he kept his own hands clean, and for a while, I will be honest with you, it very nearly worked. But here is the one thing Trent Vaughan did not understand about the diner he decided to destroy. He thought Harlan's was a piece of real estate. He thought it was a building on a valuable corner. He did not understand that it was 60 years of a town's memory, that it was where 3 generations of this community had their first date and their coffee after every funeral, and that when you attack a thing like that, you are not attacking a building, you are attacking a whole town. And a whole town, once it understands what you have done, is not a thing that a man like Trent Vaughan can survive. Before we get into this, if you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And while you are here, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a corner of Main Street, to a griddle my grandfather bought in 1954, and to the town that grew up around it. I was raised in Brantley, a town of about 7,000 people where the state road becomes Main Street for 1.5 miles and then becomes the state road again. It is not a fancy place, but it is a real one, the kind of town where people still know each other, and the center of it, the actual living heart of it, is a diner on the corner of Main and 3rd called Harlan's. My grandfather, Sam Harlan I, whose name I carry, came back from the service in the early 50s, bought that corner when it was nothing, and opened a diner with a counter, a griddle, and a coffee pot. He ran it for 30 years. My father ran it for 25 after him, and I have run it for the last 12, and my whole life is inside that building. And so, in a real way, is the whole life of this town. Let me tell you what a place like Harlan's actually is. Because if you have never lived in a small town, you might think it is just a restaurant, and it is not. And Trent Vaughan's whole mistake was that he thought it was. Harlan's is where the farmers come at 5 in the morning before the fields, in the same booths their fathers sat in. It is where the high school kids come after the Friday game, loud and happy, the way I once did. It is where old Walt Diemer has had the same breakfast, 2 eggs over easy and wheat toast, every single morning for 31 years, in the same seat at the counter, and where we start his coffee when we see his truck turn onto Main, because we know it is him. It is where the whole town gathered, packed wall to wall the morning after the flood 2 years ago, to figure out how to help each other. It is where funerals end up, and where first dates begin, and where a man who has lost his job can sit over a cup of coffee we will quietly never charge him for and not feel alone. My grandfather understood that he was not really selling food. He was selling a place to belong. I understood it too. Trent Vaughan never understood it at all, and that is why in the end the town belonged to me and not to him. Let me tell you about a few of them, the regulars, because they are not extras in this story. They are the whole point of it. There is Walt Diemer, who I have mentioned, 80 now, a widower these last 6 years, and I will tell you plainly that some mornings I think Harlan's is the only reason Walt puts on his boots and comes into the world at all, because a man who lives alone needs one place where people are glad to see him and start his coffee without being asked. And for Walt, that place is my counter. There is Ruthie, who waited tables for my father for 30 years and still comes in every afternoon for pie, and to tell my staff they are doing it wrong, with love. There are the Hendricks brothers, who have argued about the same things in the same booth every Sunday for as long as I can remember. There is the young mother who came in during the worst of her divorce and sat in a back booth, and I brought her a slice of pie she did not order and did not charge her for, and who now comes in every week with her kids and always will. These are not customers. My grandfather knew it, and my father knew it, and I know it. When Trent Vaughan looked at Harlan's, he saw square footage on a corner. What he was actually attacking was Walt Deemer's reason to get up in the morning, and Ruthie's whole history, and a divorced mother's one safe booth, and he never once understood that, and it is exactly why he lost. I run it with my wife, Denise, who does the books and the baking, and our 2 kids help on weekends, and I have a small staff who have been with me for years and are more like family than employees. We do not get rich. A diner in a town of 7,000 does not make anyone rich. But we do fine, we always did fine. We paid our bills and put a little by and kept the doors open and the coffee hot for 60 years, through good times and hard ones, 3 generations of Harlans on the same corner. And that corner, it turned out, was the problem. Because that corner, the corner my grandfather bought for almost nothing in 1954, had become, over 60 years, one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in Brantley, right at the center of everything, and a man named Trent Vaughan had decided he wanted it. Trent Vaughan came to Brantley about 2 years ago. He was a developer from somewhere else, a smooth, expensive-looking man of about 50, who had made his money putting up the kind of developments that look the same in every town in America. The strip of chain stores, the bank branch, the mixed-use block with the fake brick facade. He had bought up several parcels around the center of Brantley quietly, and he had a big plan, a whole development for the middle of our town, and the one piece he needed, the keystone, the corner that made the whole thing work, was mine, Harlan's corner. And so one day Trent Vaughan walked into my diner, sat down at the counter, ordered a coffee he did not drink, and made me an offer to buy the place. I want to be fair to him at the start, because at the start he was pleasant enough. His first offer was not even insulting. It was a real number, more money than a diner on a corner in Brantley had any business being worth, and I understood that he was paying for the location, not the business. And I told him politely over that untouched cup of coffee, the same thing I would tell him every time he asked over the next many months. I told him it was not for sale, not because the number was too low, because it was not a thing I would sell at any number. I told him that this diner was my grandfather's and my father's, and that it was the heart of this town, and that I was not the owner of it so much as the caretaker of it, holding it for the next Harlan and for the town, and that there was no price on a thing like that, and I was sorry, but the answer was no, and it would always be no. I meant it kindly. I even shook his hand. I did not understand yet what kind of man I was saying no to, because Trent Vaughan was a man who had never in his life heard the word no and accepted it. To a man like that, no is not an answer. It is an obstacle, a starting position, a thing to be worked around or worn down. He came back, and he came back raising his offer, sending letters, once sending a lawyer, and each time I said the same thing kindly, and each time I watched his pleasantness wear a little thinner, until one afternoon, standing in front of my diner, he dropped the mask for just a second, and he said something I did not fully understand until much later. He said with a cold little smile that everything has a price, and that sometimes a man does not know his price until circumstances help him find it. And then he smiled and got in his big SUV and drove away, and I stood there on the sidewalk with a bad feeling I could not name. I named it soon enough. Trent Vaughan had just told me to my face that if I would not sell him the diner, he was going to change my circumstances until I had to. I just did not know yet how he intended to do it. It started so quietly that at first I did not see it as anything but bad luck. The first thing was a health inspection, an unscheduled one, prompted, the inspector told me, by a complaint. Now, we run a clean kitchen. My grandfather ran a clean kitchen, my father ran a clean kitchen, and I run a clean kitchen because in a town of 7,000, your reputation is the whole business and there are no secrets. The inspection found nothing serious, a minor thing or two fixed on the spot. But it rattled me, because in 12 years and 3 generations we had never had a complaint. I did not think much of it. Then, a few weeks later, another complaint, another surprise inspection, then a third. Someone was filing anonymous health complaints against my diner, over and over, and each one triggered an inspection. And even though each inspection cleared us, the word started to get around town. The way it does, that the health department kept coming to Harlan's, and you know how people are, where there is smoke, there must be fire, and I could feel it, the first little chill of doubt creeping into a reputation 60 years in the building. Then came the reviews. I'm not a computer man, but Denise is, and one evening she called me over to the office in a strange voice and showed me the internet, where a whole run of reviews had appeared about Harlan's. Terrible ones. 1-star reviews from names I did not recognize, accounts that had never posted about anything else, describing food poisoning, describing a rat in the dining room, describing filth, describing things that had simply never happened. There is no rat in my dining room. There has never been a case of food poisoning traced to my kitchen in 60 years. But there they were, review after review, appearing in clusters, and to a stranger scrolling past or to a young family in Brantley deciding where to eat, Harlan's suddenly looked like a place with a serious problem. And I stood there in the office looking at those lies glowing on the screen, and the bad feeling from the sidewalk came back stronger because I understood now that this was not bad luck. Bad luck does not file the same anonymous complaint 5 times and post a dozen fake reviews in a week. This was a campaign. Someone was doing this to me on purpose. And business started to fall. Slowly at first, then not so slowly. The regulars stayed, God bless them. The farmers and old Walt Deemer and the people who had known us forever. But the others, the young families, the people passing through, the folks who checked the internet before they chose a place, they started to thin out. Booths that had been full on a Saturday morning for 60 years sat empty. The rumors did their work. I heard secondhand that people were saying the health department was always at Harlan's, that they had heard something about a rat, that maybe the Harlan place had let things slip. Every one of those whispers was a lie planted by a man in a big SUV, and every one of them took a little more of the business my family had built over 3 generations, and I watched the numbers Denise kept get worse and worse, and I lay awake at night doing the math and understanding, with a cold dread that at this rate we could not last. The rumors were the cruelest part, because a rumor has no face you can answer. I could fix a health code item on the spot. I could not fix a whisper. I would be at the grocery store and feel a conversation change when I walked up. And I would know they had been talking about Harlan's, about the inspections, about the rat that never existed. A woman I had known since grade school actually asked me gently, trying to be kind, whether everything was all right at the diner, because she had heard some things and she just wanted to check. And I stood in that grocery aisle and understood that a lie about my family's life work had reached even her, one of the good ones, and that I had no way to chase it down and kill it because it had no source I could point to. That is the genius of doing it in the dark. Trent Vaughan never had to say a single false word out loud where it could be traced to him. He just had to plant the seeds, the anonymous complaints, and the fake reviews, and let the ordinary machinery of a small town, the well-meaning gossip, the where there's smoke, do the rest of the killing for him, for free. He turned my own town, the thing I loved most, into the weapon against me. And for a while it worked, because a town's whispers are a powerful thing. What he forgot is that the same town, once it learns it has been lied to and used, turns that power around with a fury and points it back at the liar. That we would be strangled. That eventually I would have no choice but to go to Trent Vaughan, hat in hand, and take whatever he offered for a failing diner, which was, of course, exactly the plan. He was not going to buy my diner. He was going to break it first and then buy the wreckage and make me thank him for it. I want to tell you honestly about the lowest point, because these stories skip it, and they should not. There was a night, a few months in, when Denise and I sat at the counter after closing in the empty diner, under the same lights my grandfather hung, and we looked at the books, and Denise, who is the strongest person I know, put her head down on that counter and cried. And I sat there next to her in the heart of my family's whole life, 60 years of it, and I felt a despair I had never felt, and I will admit to you that a part of me, that night, thought, maybe we just sell. Maybe we take his money and we save ourselves the slow death and we walk away with something instead of nothing. And I looked around that diner, at the booth where I had my first date with Denise, at the counter seat that was always Walt Diemer's, at the faded photograph on the wall of my grandfather, standing in front of this place in 1954, with his whole future ahead of him. And I understood that selling was exactly what Trent Vaughan had engineered me to want, that the despair itself was his product, manufactured on purpose, and that if I sold, he would not have beaten me fairly. He would have cheated a town out of its heart and made me the one who handed it to him. And something in me that night at the lowest point hardened instead of breaking. I lifted Denise's head off that counter and I said, "We are not selling. He is doing this to us on purpose and I am going to prove it. And then this whole town is going to know exactly what Trent Vaughan is." Because that was the crack in his whole scheme, and once I stopped despairing long enough to see it, I could not unsee it. Trent Vaughan's entire campaign depended on being invisible. It depended on the health complaints being anonymous, the reviews being from fake accounts, the rumors having no traceable source, so that it all looked like Harlan simply going downhill on its own, like bad luck and bad management, like a tired old diner failing the way tired old diners do. The instant anyone could prove that it was not bad luck, that it was a deliberate, coordinated sabotage campaign, and the instant anyone could connect that campaign to the developer who wanted the corner, the whole thing would not just fail, it would detonate in his face in front of the entire town, because there is nothing a small town hates more than an outsider with money trying to cheat one of its own. His invisibility was his armor and his weapon both. So I did not rage, and I did not confront him, and I did not post my own angry replies to the fake reviews. I got quiet, and I got patient, and I set out to do the one thing that would end him. I set out to make the invisible visible. I started keeping records the way I should have from the first complaint. Every health complaint, the date, the inspector, the result, all of which cleared us, building a documented pattern of a business being repeatedly, anonymously, falsely reported. Every fake review, Denise printed them all, the dates they appeared, the clusters, the accounts with no other history. I was assembling a picture, and the picture laid out on paper was unmistakably a campaign, not bad luck. But a pattern is not the same as a culprit, and I knew that to truly finish Trent Vaughan, I needed to connect the sabotage to him, and I needed to catch it in the act undeniably, in a way that no one could wave away. And so I did two things. The first was the cameras. Like a lot of diners, we had an old security camera or two, but I upgraded them, quietly. Good cameras now covering the dining room and the entrance and the sidewalk out front, recording everything, because I had a feeling that a man running a sabotage campaign would, sooner or later, escalate from anonymous complaints to something staged, something physical, something that would need a person to actually do it on my premises. The second thing was that I talked quietly to a couple of people I trusted completely. One was a young man in town who understood the internet far better than I did, who was able to look at the fake reviews and see what I could not, the patterns in the accounts, the fact that several of them traced back through the digital breadcrumbs he understood, and I did not, to a common source, and the beginnings of a trail that pointed away from random strangers and towards something organized. He was a kid, really, early 20s, who had grown up eating grilled cheese at my counter, and when I told him what was happening, he got a look on his face like I had personally insulted his family, and he said, "Mr. Harlan, people who do this always think they're invisible online, and they're almost never as invisible as they think." And he was right. He showed me how the fake reviews had come in clusters, how the accounts had been created close together and had reviewed almost nothing else, how a few careless details connected them, the kind of digital fingerprints that people who are not as clever as they believe leave behind them without ever knowing it. He was patient about it, methodical, building a picture over evenings at my kitchen table with Denise bringing him pie, and slowly the anonymous cloud of hate that had been strangling my business resolved under his patient eye into something with a shape, and the shape pointed exactly where I already knew in my gut it would point. It taught me something I have thought about a lot since. These people feel invisible, because no single one of us can see the whole pattern. But the pattern is always there, and it can always be seen by someone patient enough to lay all the pieces side by side. Trent Vaughan's invisibility was never real. It was just waiting for someone to refuse to look away. And the other person I talked to was a friend at the county health department off the record, who was able to confirm for me quietly that yes, the string of complaints against Harlan's were all anonymous, all from the same untraceable channel. An unusual and suspicious pattern that had frankly been bothering them too, because they did not like being used as a weapon any more than I liked being the target. And then Trent Vaughan did exactly what I had gambled he would do, because a man who thinks he is winning gets bolder, and a man who cannot understand why a diner will not just die on schedule escalates. The anonymous complaints and the fake reviews had hurt me, but not killed me, because the regulars held on and Trent Vaughan was impatient, and so he decided to stage the thing that would finish Harlan's for good. A health scare, a real, public, witnessed incident. He sent someone into my diner, a stranger, a man no one knew, to stage a food poisoning. And it would have worked. A stranger making a loud scene about getting violently ill from Harlan's food, in front of a full dining room, with no doubt a fake review and an anonymous complaint to follow, might have been the final blow that finished 60 years. Except for one thing that Trent Vaughan, in his arrogance, never considered. He was staging his fake incident in my diner, on my corner, directly in front of the good cameras I had quietly installed for exactly this, recording everything, in high definition, from 3 angles. I will tell you how it happened, because it is the moment the whole thing turned. A man I had never seen came in on a busy Saturday, ordered a meal, ate most of it, and then, suddenly, loudly, began to perform. He clutched his stomach, he staggered, he announced to the whole dining room that the food had made him sick, that he was going to be violently ill, that this place was a health hazard, making sure everyone heard, making a scene designed to be witnessed and remembered and repeated. And a few months earlier, it might have devastated me. But I stood behind my counter, calm, because I knew 3 things that he did not. I knew my kitchen was clean and no one else was sick. I knew every second of his performance was being recorded from 3 angles in high definition, and I knew, watching him, the way you know a thing in your gut, that this was it. This was the escalation I had been waiting for, and that this stranger performing food poisoning in my grandfather's diner had just walked into the trap of his own boss's making. I want you to understand how strange and calm I felt in that moment, because it surprised even me. For months I had been living in dread, watching my family's life die by 1,000 cuts, feeling helpless against an enemy I could not see. And now, here he was, the enemy, finally made flesh, a real man in a real booth doing a real physical recorded thing. And instead of panic, I felt a deep, still calm settle over me, the calm of a hunter who has waited a long time and finally sees the thing step into the clearing. Because a rumor cannot be caught, an anonymous complaint cannot be caught. A fake review from a fake account is slippery. But a man, a physical man, performing a crime in the middle of my dining room, under 3 cameras in front of a room full of my regulars who could see perfectly well that he had just happily eaten a full plate of my food before his sudden performance, that could be caught. That was solid. That was the mistake I had been praying Trent Vaughan's impatience would eventually make. So I did not confront the man. I did not make a scene of my own. I let him finish his little play and stagger out the door, still clutching his belly. And I even, I will admit, felt something close to pity for him, a hired actor who had no idea he had just performed his boss's downfall on the best cameras money could buy. I simply watched him go, and then I walked back to the office, my heart steady, and I said to Denise the words I had been waiting months to say. I said, "We've got him." The man left, still making his scene, and I went to the office and I pulled the footage, and it was even better than I had hoped, because the cameras had not just caught his performance, the cameras out front had caught him before he came in, sitting in a car across the street for a while, and then getting out of that car, and the young man who understood these things helped me establish over the following days whose car it was and how it connected back, through a chain that was patient work to build but ultimately clear, to Trent Vaughan's operation. and the footage inside caught the whole staged performance for exactly what it was: a healthy man pretending, badly, once you were watching for it, a man who ate a full meal with every sign of enjoyment and then, on a cue only he knew, began to act. We had it all. The anonymous complaint pattern from the health department, the fake reviews traced toward a common source, and now the physical, human recorded proof of a staged sabotage incident connected to the developer who wanted my corner. The invisible had become visible, all of it. And now I had to decide what to do with it. And I did the thing my grandfather would have done, which was not to go to war quietly, but to bring it home to the town, because it was the town's diner as much as mine, and the town had a right to know what had been done to its heart. I did not go to Trent Vaughan. I did not even go straight to the authorities, though the authorities came into it soon enough, because filing false reports and staging incidents is not a small thing. What I did first was the thing that finished him, because I understood by now that Trent Vaughan's true vulnerability was not legal, it was the town. So I took the whole story, the documented pattern, the timeline, and the footage, to the one place that would put it in front of everyone at once. I took it to the town. There was a community meeting coming, a town meeting about, of all things, Trent Vaughan's proposed development, the very development that needed my corner. Vaughan would be there, presenting his vision, playing the generous man, bringing progress and jobs to Brantley. And I asked quietly, for a few minutes, to speak. That is the meeting I have been building to, though it is not the breakfast line I opened with, that came after. At that town meeting, in front of a packed room, in front of the paper, in front of Trent Vaughan himself sitting up front with his glossy renderings, I stood up, a diner owner in a clean shirt, and I did not rage, and I did not accuse in a wild voice. I said calmly that before the town decided anything about Mr. Vaughan's development, they should know a few things about how Mr. Vaughan does business and about what had really been happening to Harlan's this past year. And I laid it out. The pattern of anonymous health complaints, all of which cleared us, confirmed by the health department as suspicious, the clusters of fake reviews traced toward a source, and then I asked them to watch a short video, and I played, on the screen in that town hall, the footage of a stranger staging a fake food poisoning in my grandfather's diner, and then I showed them where that stranger had come from, and I connected the dots, calmly, one at a time, until the whole room understood all at once that the failing of Harlan's had not been bad luck or bad management. It had been a deliberate, year-long coordinated campaign of sabotage, run by the very man sitting up front with the glossy renderings, to break a family's 60-year-old business so he could buy the corner cheap. And the room went from silent to murmuring, to something I will never forget, which was the sound of a whole town turning, all at once, against a man who had tried to cheat one of its own. I want to slow down on that room, because I have replayed it many times. As the video played, as the stranger on the screen clutched his stomach and performed his fake collapse in the booth by the window, I watched the faces in that town hall instead of the screen. I watched them go from confused to understanding to angry. I saw old Walt Deemer, who had come to the meeting in his good jacket, lean forward and stare at the screen, and then turn slowly to look at Trent Vaughan with an expression I had never seen on that gentle old man's face. I saw the woman from the grocery store, the kind one who had asked me if everything was all right, put her hand to her mouth as she realized what she had unknowingly helped spread. I saw the young reporter writing as fast as she could, and I saw, in the front row, Trent Vaughan's polished confidence curdle into something small and cornered, as he understood that the room was no longer his, that his glossy renderings were now worthless, that every neighbor in Brantley was looking at him and seeing for the first time exactly what he was. I did not have to say the cruel words. The video said them, the pattern said them, and most of all the town said them to itself in that rising murmur. The sound of a community realizing all at once that the failing of its beloved diner had not been fate but a rich man's crime. I had spent months making the invisible visible, and in that room, in about 4 minutes of footage, it finally, completely, became visible to everyone at once. There is no defense against that. There is no lawyer for that. There is only a whole town seeing. Trent Vaughan tried to talk. Of course he did. Men like that always think they can talk their way out. He stood up and blustered about baseless accusations and defamation and how he would sue. But it was over, and everyone in that room could feel it was over, because you cannot talk your way past 300 of your neighbors watching video of your hired man faking food poisoning in a beloved diner. His development died that night. Because no town council in the world approves a project for a man, the whole town has just watched exposed as a saboteur. The authorities took an interest, as they should, in the false reports and the staged incident, which are actual crimes, and that became its own process for Mr. Vaughan, a process I am told did not go well for him. And Trent Vaughan, who came to Brantley to build a monument to himself in the centre of our town, left Brantley within a few months, his name a curse in every booth at Harlan's, his renderings in the trash, his corner, my corner, still exactly where my grandfather put it in 1954. And then came the morning I opened with, and it is the part that still puts a lump in my throat. When the story got out, when the town understood what had almost been done to Harlan's and how close we had come to being strangled into selling, the town did the thing that towns like Brantley still, thank God, know how to do. They showed up. Word went around mostly on the very internet that had been used to hurt us, that folks should come have breakfast at Harlan's to make up for the lost year, to show the Harlans they were not alone. And on a cold Tuesday morning, 300 people lined up down Main Street, past the hardware store and around the block, to eat eggs and drink coffee in a little diner on a corner, and to stand with their bodies and their dollars and their presents for the heart of their own town. Old Walt Deemer was first in line, of course, in his usual seat before we even unlocked the door. The paper took a picture of that line that hangs on my wall now, next to the photograph of my grandfather in 1954. I have to tell you what that morning actually felt like from behind the counter, because it healed something in me that the whole ordeal had broken. For a year I had felt alone and ashamed and beaten, watching empty booths where my whole life used to be. And then that Tuesday the door opened, and it did not stop opening. People I had not seen in months, people I had never met. Farmers and teachers and the high school kids, and young families with strollers and old-timers with canes, filling every booth and every counter seat, and then a line out the door and down the block in the cold. My whole staff came in on their day off without being asked, tying on aprons. And Denise was crying again, but the good kind this time, flipping pancakes with tears running down her face. We ran out of eggs by 9, and somebody drove to the next town for more. Walt Deemer sat in his seat and had his 2 eggs over easy, and when I set them down in front of him, his old hand caught my wrist, and he looked up at me and said, "Your granddad would be proud of you, Sammy." And I had to go into the back for a minute so the whole diner would not see me lose it. That is what Trent Vaughan never understood, standing at that red light in his big SUV watching the line. He thought he was fighting a man over a corner. He was fighting a town over its own heart, and a town will always win that fight if only one stubborn family refuses to sell in the dark and gives them the chance to stand up in the light. And Trent Vaughan drove down Main Street that morning and got caught at the light in front of my diner and had to sit there and watch it. I did not wave. I did not gloat. I just kept pouring coffee. That was gloat enough. Harlan's is still there on the corner of Main and 3rd, and it is doing better than it has done in 20 years, because a town that nearly lost its heart does not soon forget to cherish it. My kids work the weekends, and my daughter has started talking in the way kids do about running it someday, the 4th generation, and I try not to let her see how much that means to me. Denise bakes the pies. Walt Deemer has his 2 eggs over easy and his wheat toast every morning in his seat, and we still start his coffee when we see his truck turn onto Main. And on the wall, side by side, hang the 2 photographs, my grandfather in 1954 with his whole future ahead of him, and the line of 300 neighbors around the block, 60 years later, refusing to let that future be stolen. I look at those 2 pictures every morning when I open up, and I understand that they are the same picture, really. They are both pictures of what a diner actually is, which is not a building on a valuable corner. It is a town holding on to itself. So let me leave you with what a year of sabotage taught me, and then I will let you go. The people who come to take what is yours by breaking it quietly, they depend above everything on being invisible. They depend on the harm looking like bad luck, on the sabotage looking like your own failure, on you being too ashamed and too isolated and too busy drowning to prove that it is being done to you on purpose. Their invisibility is the whole weapon, so do not despair in private, which is exactly what they want. Get quiet and get patient, and set out to make the invisible visible. Keep the records, watch the pattern, put up the cameras, catch them in the act, and then do not fight them in the shadows where they are strong, but bring the truth home to the people it belongs to, the neighbors, the town, the community, and let them see, all at once, what was done. A rich man with a hidden scheme can break one family alone in the dark. He cannot survive a whole town in the daylight once it sees. My grandfather bought a corner in 1954 and built a place for a town to belong to. And when a man came to steal it in the dark, the town he built that place for turned the lights on and stood in the cold and would not let it go. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. And tell me honestly, is there a place like Harlan's in your town? A place that is really the heart of it? And would your town show up for it the way mine did? I read every single comment and I want to hear it. Take care of yourselves. Go have breakfast somewhere that knows your name, and I will see you in the next one.